Hey guys, what is up and welcome back to WarThunder with yours truly, WeBe. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to start a new series. It's called the How to Fly series. Basically, you guys request an aircraft on how I fly it, how I personally think it works best, and I'll make a video tutorial on it. Today we're going to be looking at the Avro Lancaster Mark III. People always ask me how I do well in my Lancaster. A lot of the tactics I used in my old How to Lancaster video have changed due to the damage model being different now. Also, its flight model changed. Like again, I wasn't around for 1.43, so I couldn't really speculate on new aircraft and their performance. What I will do now is I will show you the loadout I have. Basically, I have the £14,000 payload, 7.7s at universal, and the 12.7s is at armoured targets. I've got everything upgraded because I've played the Lancaster loads. By the way, if you want this skin, link will be in the description below. It still isn't quite perfect. Some of the damage model, like on the tail fins, isn't quite finished yet, but I'll get around to updating that at some point in the near future. But without further ado, let's get into game. So the Avro Lancaster Mark III is actually quite a hard bomber to play, even more so than the B-17, due to the fact that it doesn't have actually that much of a defensive armament. Luckily, the Avro Lancaster Mark III now has two 50 caliber machine guns in the rear. But again, it isn't really enough to fend off things like, I don't know, a Bearcat or a P-80 or a Focke-Wulf. You can't really use this as a high altitude heavy bomber, as it wasn't really high altitude in real life. It was just a heavy bomber, essentially. A relatively fair distance in the air. You know, general altitude that you would start at normally, around 4,000 meters probably. Would be what this thing flew at in real life. Sorry, I don't have actual specifications of what altitude it did fly at, but this is kind of how I fly the aircraft in WarThunder. What I use is a tactic I call dam busters. For those who don't know who the dam busters are, essentially they were a squadron of Lancasters that were given the task to take out a few dams in the Ruhr. And what they had to do, they had to fly at treetop level with these modified bombs called bouncing bombs. And what these bombs did is they skipped across the water and sank when it hit to the dam. It had a timer on it and then they exploded. I believe they took out one dam and damaged another 3. A lot of the squadron did get shot down, as you would imagine, unfortunately, because they're massive heavy bombers at treetop level, but it did work. They came in undetected, I know, undetected in a Lancaster, and they got their mission completed. So I use that tactic because it does work in WarThunder. People do not expect Lancasters to be at low altitude. There is another Lancaster in this lobby with me, and he chose the wrong decision. He chose to go at high altitude with the bomber spawn. Always go airfield spawn if possible in a Lancaster. Reason being is the Lancaster's ability to blend in at low altitude is stupidly good. I know it sounds stupid, but it is actually fantastic at doing its job. It is a stealthy bomber. It sounds very weird, but it is a stealthy bomber, mainly because it handles extremely well at low speeds. You'll see in this video, people always complain, oh, the Lancaster's flight model is not what it used to be. As a matter of fact, it is, but what's happened now is that all bombers have now got compression added. At low altitude, the Lancaster still has its turn time. Which is a very important point within its gameplay aspect, because you need to know how to control your aircraft. What I'm doing here is that instead of going after the bases, well, that's the thing. If there's a lot of people in my lobby with a fair few Lancasters, I will go for the bases and then try and go for the airfield. But if there's only a few, I will generally go ground targets. As I said, the bomb load I've got is the £14,000 bomb load. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going after every single one of them tanks. Every single one on one payload. One. Not going to an airfield, one payload. as you would imagine, it's quite interesting to try and fly a Lancaster without being spotted. I did actually have a game in the Lancaster Mark 1, which is I have completely stock on Bulge before I got into this, into the Lancaster Mark 3, which I was the only one left on my team. I managed to evade the entire enemy team by going through the iced up riverbeds for around 15 minutes and made it back to my base. Unfortunately, there was one waiting for me there. But this thing can be extremely stealthy, especially if you have a good crew, one that can spot enemy targets from a long way away, like the one I've got on here. The reason for that is, down at low altitude, you are a lot harder to spot, extremely hard, because in the air, you are literally a black dot flying. But due to the ground being roughly the same colour as the Lancaster, it blends in extremely well. As you see here, I'm right below a P80, and I can't believe, I can't see if that's an F80 or a P80, I apologise. I think it's an F80C, but I'm actually right below him, and he doesn't care. You know, it doesn't matter. Also, combat flaps are extremely important in a Lancaster. I do recommend you use them as much as possible while at low altitude. You'll see why in a second. But we're coming up to our targets here. I'm trying to line up a good run, but unfortunately I do kind of muck it up a little bit. You've got to be very patient when bombing ground targets in a Lancaster. Note, you need to have a 1 second time delay on all of your bombs while flying this thing at low altitude. With the 1,000 pound bombs and the kind of altitude you're flying at, you will get taken out by your own bomb if you don't. So please bear that in mind while you're in the settings. Also, that's a very good tip for any bomber really. Even if you're bombing at high altitude, always have a 1 second bomb delay, because at least you know your target's going to hit. I mean, you see the radius, that's why I take the 1000s to take out ground units. You may argue that the 500s would be better because they're more concentrated, but if you do slightly miss your target, you've always got that extra blast radius to try and take it out, which came in handy there. Now, as you see, I'm using combat flaps, and it's turning. You'll note that it's actually turning at the kind of rate that it did before. Not quite there, but it's relatively close. So this thing can still turn-ish. You have to be at very low speeds, under 200 miles per hour. I'm not sure what that would be in kilometers, I do apologise. You would need to have a converter for that. As you see, it's very easy bombing ground units. And this is basically what I did the entire game. I was going for run after run after run. I do actually get engaged by P80s and F80s, and I survive. The only issue is, because this is a rather small match, teammates are quite scarce to be able to take out targets, and I do eventually get taken out in the end by a Bearcat, Cannon Bearcat. I did, to be fair, survive a long time while being engaged by him. I was kind of annoyed with the Spitfire because he had so many chances to be able to take him out, and he didn't take them, if that makes sense. I could have easily survived this match if that Spitfire pilot wasn't being such a... I wouldn't say he's being careless, but I would say he isn't really regarding his teammates as such. Generally, if I'm in a Spitfire and I see a Lancaster in trouble, I'm within 2 clicks of him, I will generally go and help him out. As you see here, I'm about to be strafed by an F80. And he didn't really do that much, to be fair. He got my fuselage, and I have a slight leak. That's about it, really. Lancaster's still performing as it would be, really. So no issues there. Going in for a bombing run on this tank column here. I do actually take out all of these tanks. Unfortunately, there is a second F80C. So it kind of mucks up my bombing run, and I have to come round again, as you'll see here. I try and switch into gunner mode, but he unfortunately knocks the pilot out. Sorry, the gunner out. But I do put some relatively good shots into him. The thing with the Lancaster, it can actually tank quite a lot of damage if they're low caliber rounds. It cannot take much punishment from high caliber rounds, such as the 30mm, the 20mm that you see on the German aircraft. Purely because there's just so much mass being shot at the airframe in such a short period of time. It just can't cope. That F-80 is now being engaged by a few Spitfires, so we get to go in for our bombing run here. But this is generally how you have to play the Lancaster. Stealthy, turning, low altitude. Because nowadays it just cannot, it can't go at high altitude. It can't. It's impossible to win with this thing at high altitude. And that's where the 1 second bomb delay, as you see there, comes in pretty handy. The B-17 is still a high altitude aircraft. You still can use that purely because its defensive armament is slightly better. By slightly I mean a lot. Although its bomb load is slightly less, that's one of the perks of the Lancaster. You have an amazing bomb load, but you have a crap aircraft. The Lancaster's BR for its tier is god awful. I personally think the Lancaster Mark 1 should have been late tier 3 with a slightly higher battle rating, so it gets into low to mid tier tier 4 games. So that would be Tempest Mark 5, Spitfire Mark 9, Mustang Mark 1 AIM with its poor battle rating, Typhoons, Focke-Wulf 190, D9s, D12s, A4s, Bf 109 G6s. I think that's fair for the Lancaster in my opinion. Unfortunately, Gaijin Matchmaker begs to differ. I'm not entirely sure why it does have such a high battle rating. It probably is because of the payload it carries. But to be fair, with the way that most people fly the Lancaster, it really doesn't manage to drop that much of its payload. I do, purely because I know how to fly, and hopefully this video will show you how to fly it too. That's kind of the plan, to try and help you survive slightly longer in a Lancaster. Now, I'm not going to say you're never going to be shot down, because it's a Lancaster, guys, alright? It's not... Its survivability chances are very slim, unfortunately, because it's a Lancaster. And also, in WarThunder, it doesn't have its preferred flight conditions, which is at night time, does it? It's very rarely that you get a nighttime game in a Lancaster, apart from in custom battles. I've never actually had one in my Lancaster online ever, so it would be nice if Gaijin did step up the rate that night games came into battles, especially at the Lancaster's tier. Wellington is another one that needs to be down tiered a lot as well. I think max for a Wellington should be tier 3 again, and they should be folded. They shouldn't be there to kind of stock the tech tree, so to speak, because that's what the Short Sterling and the Halifax should be for. Lancaster, in my opinion, should be the late tier Bomber Command, and then below that should be the Halifax and the Short Sterling, then underneath that should be the Wellington. I think that would be what's wisest. Also, the Avro Shackleton would be a nice aircraft to come in. Not sure if it should go in the bomber line or the naval line. It could go after something like the Short Sunderland. That would be quite good for the Lancaster. Sorry, the Shackleton. But the Avro Manchester could be quite good as well. Not gonna lie. But the Lancaster needs tweaking a little bit, battle rating wise and tier wise, because unfortunately it does suffer at the tiers it's at. I'm not entirely sure why Gaijin haven't made a move on this yet. I can't really speculate on that, but this is basically how I fly my Lancaster. So if this does help you, please give this video a thumbs up. I know this doesn't work all the time, it does depend on your matchmaking, but this is generally what I find best. So notes: take off from airfield, have a 1 second bomb delay, have minimum amount of fuel, go low constantly at treetop level, turn with combat flaps to be able to turn easier while gaining lift. Make sure you do not bring your gear up too early on the runway, otherwise you will not sustain lift. If that is the case and you see your Lancaster dropping, make sure you put your landing flaps down. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you click that like button below. Subscribe if you're new around it for some more WarThunder content. Make sure you tell me in the comment section below what aircraft you want me to fly next. Take care guys. I'll see you next time.